This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. Bruchim Habayim. Welcome to the Shimru International Learning Program. We continue in the Lamed Tes Malachas. We are up to Malacha 18. Your favorite Malacha, Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirin, preparing two heddles. So that is the Malacha we're going to do today. It may not be a Malacha which is very applicable, B'zman hazeh. Not too many people are in the weaving business. However, there is a very important point of Lamdis that will emerge from this Malacha. If you look on your second sheet, you see the eye of the heddles. So during the process of arranging the warp threads on the loom, the threads must be passed through heddles. Heddles are cords or wires, each with an eye in middle, through which a thread can be passed. So you put the threads through the eye of the heddle. They are attached to a mounting or frame. They allow every alternating warp thread to be raised or lowered. Basically, the odd warp threads are attached to one frame and the even ones are attached to the other, and they alternate highering and lowering the various frames. The process is then reversed and the weft thread is passed back through the warp threads. So basically, by highering and lowering, you allow the weft to go above and go below, above and below, and then it goes back, and that's how the weaving process is accomplished. As will be shown, it is the subject of debate what exactly the definition of Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim is. We're going to see an important machlokes. What is the definition of Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim? Okay, so far so good. Everyone enjoying so far? I hope so. I don't see too many faces, so hopefully, Yitzi, I see you. How you doing? So, that's the Av Malacha. The Rambam says, Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim Chayev. One who makes two heddles is liable. One who prepares two heddles is liable. But then the Tolda of the Malacha is, the Rambam says, if you make a sieve, or a strainer, or a basket, or a hairnet, or if you weave a bed of ropes, these are all items that are produced with the weaving process. This is a Tolda derivative of preparing the heddles, and from the time you prepare two frames of any of these, he is liable. So too, anyone who prepares two heddles in the process of making any item which is made with frames, one is chayev. So anyone who prepares two heddles in the process of making any item which is made with frames, so your chayev. The Rambam does not list any mitzvos d'Rabbanan on Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim. Now, how does Rashi define the malacha of Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim? Rashi in two places, on Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, and Rashi on Kuf Hey Amud Aleph. Rashi learns that the definition of Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim is threading the heddle. Rashi on Daf Ayin Gimel says, Shenasan Shnei Chutin B'toich HaBeis Nir. You put the two threads in through the heddle. The implication of Rashi is that the malacha of Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim refers to threading the warp through the heddles, and Rashi says the same thing on Daf Kuf Hey. Now, what is the function? What's the purpose of the heddles? So the Tosfos Yom Tov explains basically what we outlined before. The heddles are wires or cords. Each one has an eye through which you pass through a thread, and they're attached to a frame. And the heddles allows every alternating warp thread to be raised or lowered. So, for example, every odd warp thread passes through a heddle attached to frame A, and every even warp thread passes through a heddle attached to frame B. When the weaver raises frame A and lowers frame B, so the odd warp threads are raised, the even ones descend, it creates a gap, and the weft could be passed through. Then it's reversed, and when the weft comes through on the other end, it goes in the above and below, the ones that it went below and above the first time around. Now, according to Rashi, the definition of a mesach, which is warping, is stretching the warp threads from the warp beam to the cloth beam. And then Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirin is threading the two eyes of the heddle. However, the Tosfos Rid in Masechta Shabbos Ein Gimel and Beis questions Rashi, and he says Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim refers to threading the warp threads through the heddles. Again, Rashi says Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim is threading the warp threads through the heddles, and the Tosfos Rid has a question on that. He has two questions on that, for that matter. He says, number one, that it's not mashma. It would not seem to be correct that threading the heddles would be considered a separate malacha. No, threading the heddles is part of mesach. It's part of warping. Threading the heddles is a separate malacha of Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim. Says the Tosfos Rid, no. Threading the heddles is included in mesach. And Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirin is not mashma, you're threading the heddles. It sounds like you're making the heddles. And therefore the Tosfos Rid says that in fact Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim is constructing the heddles. When it says Oiseh, it means you arrange the heddle in the place where you intend to insert the warp threads. And between every cord of the knots of the heddles is called a bias. So if you produce, you create, you make two eyes as heddles, that is the definition of Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim. The Tosfos Rid says, Oiseh, when it says one who made, who perushay, shemasakein habeis nir. You fix the heddle, where you're going to put in the warp threads, and between each thread you tie the Batei Nirim and you make it into a frame. The Lechem Mishnah feels that the words Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim have such a strong implication that you're making the heddle, not threading it, that he learns that's exactly what Rashi means. The Lechem Mishnah says what Rashi means is one who produces the heddles. However, the Tosfos Yom Tov interprets Rashi like Rashi seems to say, that you're threading the heddles. And what is it? How do you read the words Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim? He reads it as if it would say Ha'oiseh Bishtei Batei Nirim, one who made in the two heddles. In other words, in order to reconcile what Rashi's comments with the words of the Gemara, Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim, the Tosfos Rid says, no, Rashi holds Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim means that you thread the warp threads, though you thread the heddles, but you read it as if it would say Oiseh Bishtei Batei Nirim. Now, I'm going to share with you the opinion of the Meiri, which some say the Rambam learns this way, and the Meiri seems to learn that the definition of Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim does not refer to making the heddles, and it doesn't refer to stringing them, but any time you make a net-like structure which resembles weaving, you're making a rectangular frame or a parallel frame, that is the malach of Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim. It is, so to speak, a similar type of activity to weaving. That is the opinion of the Meiri. Some say the Rambam learns that way. By the way, just as a side point, the malacha of Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim does not apply only to threads, but the Gemara in Shabbos says on Ayin Down Beis that somebody who creates a receptacle out of reeds would be chayiv for Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirim as well. So it's not limited to threading. Okay, this is the lumdus that I want to take out of today's subject, and that is, if you look in the Mishnah Masechta Shabbos and Daf Ayin Gimel, interestingly, it lists 39 malachos, and by some of the malachos it gives a shiur. For example, it says Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirin. Why doesn't it say Oiseh Beis Nir? No, you have to have a minimum of 2. Or if you have to, for kesiva, you have to write a minimum of 2 letters. There's certain malachos where the Mishnah gives a specific shiur. Now, in general, there's a shas machlokes, and you need to know this. And the way you're going to remember it is it's on daf ayin daled. The letters are da, no. Okay? This is something you really need to know. Daf ayin daled. Chatzi shiur. We know sometimes the Torah says don't eat something, and usually it's aser b'kezayis. Sometimes it's aser a dried fig. Let's say you eat or partake or violate less than the shiur that the Torah gives for a particular prohibition. Is that an Isser D'Oraisa, or is it not an Isser D'Oraisa? We know you're not going to be chayiv a carbon chatas, you might not be chayiv misa, but is that biblically forbidden, or is it only rabbinically forbidden? It's a famous machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Gufa, chatzi shiur, a half a shiur. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, aser min haTorah. Reish Lakish Amar, muter min haTorah. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, aser min haTorah. Rabbi Yochanan says it's aser min haTorah. Kiven de chazil it's tarufe isura ka'achal. Since, let's say, the Torah says don't eat something, and you ate, and usually a shiur of achila is a kezayis, and the guy ate a half a kezayis. So the halacha is you're chayiv. The reason why you're chayiv midoraisa, the reason why it's an isur doraisa, is because you could end up eating another half a kezayis, and then it will be mitzaref to violate the shiur the Torah gives, even for bringing a carbon or a chiyav kares. So since the amount that was eaten could join up with more of that item, it is an isur doraisa. And Reish Lakish says, no, it's mutter midoraisa. The Torah says don't eat, and you didn't eat because you ate less than the shiur. The Gemara is talking about, the specific example, is somebody ate half of an olive's worth of forbidden food. Rabbi Yochanan says you violated a doraisa, because if you were to eat another half an olive, that would be a full amount. So therefore even a half an olive is aser midoraisa. And Reish Lakish says no. The minimum requirement is it has to be considered eating, and this is not considered eating. So the question is, now we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, that chatzi shiur is aser min haTorah. Can you apply this to other isurim, to hilchos Shabbos? The Gemara on Masechta Shabbos, on daf ayin daled. What do you know? The Gemara says, can you do boirer on something smaller than the shiur? So the Gemara says, of course not. You're not allowed to violate isurim less than the shiur. And Rashi explains, can you bake less than the shiur? I understand there's no chiyav chatos, because we hold chat, but there is an isur d'oraisa because we hold chatzi shiur aser min haTorah. Like it says in Masechta Yuma, chatzi shiur aser min haTorah. So how could it say you could be boirer lechatchila? So we're applying to Hilchos Shabbos the Yesod that chatzi shiur is aser min haTorah. And the Meiri says that any breira which is aser even less than the shiur, even less than a groigorus, even though there's no chiyav chatas, because chatzi shiur is aser min haTorah. So Tosfos has the following gevaldige kasha. Tosfos says, so why, if chatzi shiur is aser min haTorah, why does the Mishnah say Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirin, someone who made 2 heddles, or someone who wove 2 threads, or somebody who unraveled 2 threads, wrote a shiur? What do you mean? Even less than the shiur is still aser min haTorah. Chatzi shiur aser min haTorah. If chatzi shiur is aser min haTorah, then why does the Mishnah have to give a shiur of shtei batei nirin? Even 1 nir would be an isur d'oraisa. So the Minchas Chinuch attempts to answer this question of Tosfos. The Minchas Chinuch quotes the Sefer Mogein Avos of Rav Mordechai Benet. And Rav Mordechai Benet says, Tosfos is medayik. Why does the Mishnah give a shiur shtei batei nirin, or a Shtei Oiseh, one who writes two Oiseh, one who erases two Oiseh, if half a Shiur is also min ha-Torah. Says the Mordcha Benet, Chatzi Shiur Aser min ha-Torah is only on those things that the Mishnah doesn't give a shiur. But if the Mishnah says that you're only chayiv if you make two Batei Nirin, or if you write two letters, or if you write two letters, if you make one base nir, or you write one letter, or you erase one letter, it's not an Isser at all. Even Rabbi Yochanan would agree. Chatzi Shiur Aser min ha-Torah is only when there's no shiur explicitly. So we assume it's a kazayis, but even less than kazayis would be an Isser D'Oraisa. But when the Mishnah and Chazal have a tradition, it has to be two Batei Nirin, it has to be two Oiseh. If you do one base nir or one Ois, it would not be an Isser D'Oraisa. There is a difference between the malachas the Mishnah gives the shiur and if it doesn't. If it doesn't give a shiur, then let's say baking or selecting, okay, you have to bake kazayis, but even less than kazayis would be asur midaraisa. But when the Mishnah explicitly gives a shiur, says the Minchas Chinuch, if you do less than the shiur, we do not say chatzi shiur asur min ha-Torah. There is no isur at all. Why should that be? Why would it be that some malachos, if you do less than the shiur, there's no isur at all, and other malachos, if you do less than the shiur, we say chatzi shiur asur min ha-Torah? Why by baking do we say even if you bake less than a kazayis, chatzi shiur asur min ha-Torah? And when it comes to, let's say, when it comes to two Batei Nirin, we don't say chatzi shiur asur min ha-Torah. So the Sefer Makar Halacha says as follows: we can clear the following chakira, which means we could ponder the following halachic query, the following halachic dilemma. When there's a shiur in the malacha of Shabbos, that you're now to do a certain malacha, and there's a measurement of a minimum that you have to accomplish to be in violation. Is it that it's a measurement of what constitutes a malacha, that it's not a malacha less than the shiur? Or no, it's like any other shiur. Of course it's a malacha less than the shiur, but in order for the malacha to be liable, it has to be a shiur chashuv. So it's not a shiur in the malacha, it's the shiur in the significance of what you're setting out to do. In other words, is this a shiur in less than two Batei Nirin is not a malacha? Or no, it is a malacha. It's just, we're not going to hold you liable until you accomplish a certain significant achievement. Says the Sefer Makar Halacha, that is the difference between the various shiurim. When it comes to baking, when it comes to cooking, there it's a malacha regardless of how much you bake or cook. The shiur is just a shiur in what's considered significant and chashuv. Therefore, if you do less than the shiur, although it's not significant, still chatzi shiur asur min ha-Torah. You did the malacha. You might not be chayiv kares. You might not have to bring a carbon, but you still violated the malacha. But there are certain shiurim, like stringing the heddle or writing, that if you just string one head or you write one letter, it's not that you didn't do something significant. You didn't do the malacha. The shiur is not a shiur in chashivos, it's a shiur in the minimum requirement of the malacha. And that is why, according to the Minchas Chinuch, if somebody makes one base nir, you'd be completely pater. Or if somebody writes one letter, you'd be completely pater, and we don't apply chatzi shiur asur min ha-Torah. Chatzi shiur asur min ha-Torah is only if it's a shiur in chashivos, but if it's a shiur in the malacha, then we don't say chatzi shiur asur min ha-Torah. However, comes the Mishnah Berurah, and the Mishnah Berurah says, no, nein. The Mishnah Berurah is in Siman Shin Mem Sif Gimel, that there's no difference between any of the malachos. Whenever you do a half a requirement, it is asur min ha-Torah. Whether it's baking, whether making one heddle, or writing one letter. That is the opinion of the Mishnah Berurah, and he substantiates this from the Magen Avram, and he says that that it's the Isser D'Oraisa to do half of malacha, like every half measure of forbidden food, which we know, like Rabbi Yochanan, is Aser Min Torah. So too, when it comes to the malachos of Shabbos. Now, so the question would be then, according to the Mishnah Berurah, that one is chayiv not only on a chatzi shiur of bishul and a chatzi shiur of afiyah, but one is chayiv even on a chatzi shiur of Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirin. In other words, if one would string two heddles, that even if you string one heddle, not like the Minchas Chinuch and the Sefer that we just saw that explained the Minchas Chinuch, the Makar Halacha, that you would be completely pater. The Mishnah Berurah holds when it comes to all malachos, one violates an Isser D'Oraisa by even doing part of the malacha. So why would the Mishnah have to give a shiur dafka by Oiseh Shnei Batei Nirin or Kosev Shnei Oiseh? So the Tiferes Yisrael says the reason the Mishnah gives a shiur is because you might have thought that without the shiur, had the Mishnah not given a shiur, you might have thought making two heddles is not accomplishing anything, or sewing two threads is not accomplishing anything. So the chiddush of the Mishnah is not that only if you do this amount and less is nothing. The chiddush of the Mishnah is this amount is still a davar chashav, and you would be fully chayev even to bring a carbon for this amount. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says regarding the Gemara in Shabbos on Daf Kov Daled Amud Beis that if somebody writes two letters separately, he's pater. So, what do you mean you're pater? It's right. The Gemara says Kasav al Shnei Koslei Habayis. If you write two letters on two different walls, so that's tantamount to writing one letter and one letter. The Gemara says you're pater. It's only an Isser D'Rabbanan. Why would it only be D'Rabbanan? It should be D'Oraisa. And basically the Mishnah Berurah says that when the Gemara says you're pater, it means at the very least it's an Isser D'Rabbanan, but sometimes it would even be an Isser D'Oraisa. So the bottom line is that there's a very amazing and interesting machlokes, the Minchas Chinuch and the Mishnah Berurah, regarding those malachos that the Torah, that the Mishnah gives a shiur for if you do less than the shiur. The Mishnah Berurah says it would be an Isser D'Oraisa, Chatzi Shiur Aser Min Torah. The Minchas Chinuch says no. These are not shiurim in chashivas, these are shiurim in the malacha. We don't say Chatzi Shiur Aser Min Torah when the shiur given is a shiur, a measurement in the definition of the malacha, not just the definition definition of chashivas. Okay, we're going to hold it over here today. Someone has a question?
Yeah, how we custom then?
We go like the Mishnah Berurah. We go like the Mishnah Berurah. That Chatzi Shiur Aser Min Torah by all the malachas of Shabbos. I mean, the Minchas Chinuch has a nice lamdus, but lahalacha we're going to go like the Mishnah Berurah. Okay, everyone, thank you very much for joining. Hope to see everybody next time. Gesundheit, and have a wonderful Shabbos. Shkoyach, Kol Tov. Bye-bye.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.